Well, it is a chance for me to sit down and have a conversation with you here on Thinking Out Loud. I'm Sheldon McLeod. This is the saltwire.com online network. And I really do appreciate the fact that people have really made themselves available online since, we've kind of been forced into the world of these kinds of digital meetings. But it really does help us connect to have conversations and to keep the dialogue moving. I mean, the weather, the changing of the trees, and we're going to be once again in just a few months in the midst of winter talking about people who have not found adequate housing. Why? There are a lot of things going on here. But just a few weeks ago, there was a standing committee on community services, and there were people there to speak to this issue. In fact, Tim Crooks was there from Phoenix Youth Services, and he described it as a situation that started to build itself out 10 plus years, and that we haven't seen the worst of it. And the magnitude of how we need to respond is going to be huge. As he says, our present network and ability to do that is stretched to the breaking point. The problem is guaranteed to get significantly worse before it gets better. And Phoenix Youth Programs is something that is an agency in Halifax. And this is an opportunity for me to introduce someone to you. Rob Morris is his name. And it says here, Director of Residential Programs. That's your title, Rob?
That's correct, yes.
So what is it that you do with Phoenix?
So I am the Director of Residential Programs at Phoenix, and basically I oversee the residential component of Phoenix. So we've got a number of supports and services designed to support youth, families, and communities. Everything from early intervention programs, supporting some younger folks in our community, through residential programs, and right on through to learning and employment programs, offering advancement in terms of into the labor market field or opportunities into educational opportunities. So there's a large spectrum of services and supports at Phoenix, but my component is the residential component, which is both a combination of emergency shelter right on through to long-term housing opportunities.
And who is it that Phoenix serves?
So we provide supports and services to youth in our community, to families in our community, and to the communities in general. So, and we could say HRM, but we see youth right across the province. So we are seeing, youth engage in our programs from right across the province, but we are based in HRM.
So just for definition, services, youth is what age person?
So for us, it's 11 till up until it could be 29, but 11 to 25 is that age range, but we see youth beyond the 25-year range as well.
The comment that things are bad and they will likely get worse. What is the situation for Phoenix House right now?
So let me preface that a little bit. So I've been with the agency for many years, and I've been really thrilled to see, anyone in HRM see lots of cranes, lots of housing, lots of stuff being built in terms of the in Halifax recently, which we haven't seen for many years. But I want to clarify that in terms of that's not the housing that we typically are looking at or the solution for young people in our community. That is market-based housing, for-profit-based housing, that is by and large out of reach for young people in our community. In fact, Sheldon, there was a recent study this past year from a national entity called Youthful Cities. And in that process, they examined 27 cities, major cities across Canada, and discovered in terms of affordability for housing, Halifax was dead last in our country. So for years, we had talked about Toronto and Vancouver as those places in which, wow, look at the housing crisis there. But to feel and to understand and to know that Halifax, in terms of affordability for young people, aged 15 to 29, ranked dead last, clearly was an eye-opener for us, but not something we're surprised by. We've been seeing this trend now for the past number of years in terms of a lack of affordability. And youth just can't enter into that stage of the continuum where they're looking at market housing. It's just not a viable option, and hasn't been a viable option now for a number of years, and it's getting worse. What we're clearly seeing is there's just no affordable stock or infrastructure in housing. It just doesn't exist. And what is coming online is largely out of the realm of possibility for young people in our community. And which means they're staying longer in shelters, they're staying longer in transitional housing, and not making that transition into successful independence into our community because there's nowhere to go. It's that simple, unfortunately.
Yeah, I was going to say the comment is made. Well, it's about the housing stock. We need more, and that
Yeah.
you see these high rises go up. You see these condos, so people will move from there, then perhaps leave a place that's a little more affordable to move up, or I guess that's the scenario that's being spelled out. But you're saying no, it's not going to make a difference. That's not
It's
going to
not
fill a
making
need.
it's not making the difference in that way. No, it's just not. We're working with folks who clearly have deep affordability issues, and the entry point into the market doesn't allow them to join into that market successfully or well. And unfortunately, youth also face the stigmatization of being young and trying to get into the housing market. Imagine a 21-year-old or 22-year-old or a 19-year-old trying to access housing in comparison to maybe an older person with more job experience and relevant kind of life experience that may be that may warrant a bit of a stronger application per se. So we are seeing certainly youth struggling to get into the market to begin with. But it's not just housing. It's a complex issue. Well, I can say housing is one, affordability is one piece. Along with that is it's housing and working with folks who are precariously housed or homeless. There are complex issues here, and housing is one part of that journey, but there's a need there for so much more. So when we talk about investments in housing and housing stock, that's a critical piece. But there also needs to be investments in the supports and resources that go along to support youth in that transition. Studies show that the longer someone is homeless or in housing precarity, then outcomes become worse. It's harder to get entrenched in terms of back on your feet, number one. And the need there for supports around mental health, around addictions, around access to education resources, and into the labor market intensify. So when we talk about housing, there's a term around that a lot of people use in our sector on housing first. You have to have someone housed first, which we totally get. But it's not housing only. It's housing along with the resources that social service agencies such as ourselves at Phoenix and others in our community so desperately need in order to help support individuals make that transition to a greater level of autonomy and independence moving forward. It really is both. It's a complex issue.
Now, when Tim Crook spoke to this legislative committee, and he said, if you're talking about it as a commodity, housing, that's market based. If you're talking about it as a basic human right, there's a responsibility. I'm interpreting some of what he said. Responsibility for government, with whether that means partnerships with NGOs, to do something to make something happen. So where are we at to see that move towards taking some responsibility to offer basic human rights, which is basic shelter for people? Where are we at there?
So we were thrilled when the federal government did that declaration in 2019 that promoted housing as a basic human right. That is certainly a step in the right direction, and hopefully will allow for the transition to use that kind of proclamation or declaration in a way in which we start to measure ourselves in terms of, as a country and as a province, in terms of how we begin to make sure that housing is a human right and having access to housing is a key fundamental piece. We think it becomes setting some benchmarks and setting some of the policy frameworks, if you will, for addressing homelessness in our community. I think the key piece here in many ways is there needs to be investments at a significant level from federal government, from provincial governments, from municipal government. This is everyone's problem. This is not a provincial problem alone. This is not a municipal problem alone. This is not a social service agency problem alone. But we need to be involved in those pieces of engagement in order to advance along non-market housing options, whether that be for young people that we're working with, whether that be for men, women in our community. We need to be involved in those solutions moving forward. And it's going to take investments not only in the housing stock, but also investments in the resources that go along with supporting folks in those programs. It's that simple. And I think, we're pleased to be, as you mentioned, Tim, to be in the standing committee recently. And we count community services as big allies and supporters of our work. But there's more to be done. It's not, I think there's a collective understanding with the department and with the province around housing. We just want to spotlight at the end of the day more of the non-market housing solutions that need to exist, and not only the housing stock. That's only one part of the solution. It really is about the supports and resources into other parts of that continuum, whether that be health, whether that be justice, education. Like, everyone has a part to play here in our efforts to support those that we're working with, particularly in our community. It's relationship is key here for us in terms of having those effective relationships within various levels of government and with other service providers. It needs to be an ollie in. Like the solutions here it's challenging. It truly is.
Are you an optimist, Rob?
I am an optimist. I think there's opportunities. I can see opportunities ahead of us. I think what's been really helpful, I really has been the focus on housing in the past number of years. If we had this conversation maybe 5 years ago, there wouldn't have been as much of a community conversation, perhaps, beyond service providers and some folks. But I think housing has gripped all of us. It's everyone. If we talk about, the current cost of inflation, the current cost of challenges around cost of housing, cost of gas, I think it's been radaring for many folks in our community, not just those folks who are most vulnerable. We're seeing housing as a theme right across our sector for, young professionals, students coming out of the field trying to get into the housing market. It's almost impossible. So I think we are starting to see a much more critical analysis around housing and what that means. And this just isn't a provincial issue. This is a national, international issue. I work with partners right across the country, youth serving agencies across the country, and I see the same thing from province to province to province. Everyone's talking housing and the lack thereof and the required steps to advance along housing. So I think it's radaring, number one. Pleased to see again in 2019 that declaration as a basic human right. That's a leap forward for us as well, a leap forward for many in our sector. So I'm an optimist, but I know there's challenges, but I do feel that there's the discussion's happening, and I know it's happening, and folks are really invested in trying to, what do we do here to make this here work?
Well, for Phoenix Youth Programs, as you say, you're filling a need. That need is constant. It may even be growing somewhat. So, for your advice for folks who might find themselves, young people or community members who say this is a problem, this is a challenge, they need your help. How do they get it?
So reach out, whether that be through online, through phone calls, if you go on our line website, phoenixyouth.ca, you will certainly get information and contact information there. By all means, reach out, whether that be shelter or any kind of need that you have. We're available 24/7 as part of that process, and we'd love to hear from you, number one, and can see what we can do to support you moving forward.
Well, I see or I sense that some blunt conversation is happening, but with the respect of knowing you have to work together in 100%. Order to get through this. It has to be a community effort, and it sounds like the folks at Phoenix are keeping that top of mind, but still perhaps putting a little pressure, holding feet to fire, if you want to use that analogy, to make sure that action happens, given that 10 years ago, that inaction brought us to where we are today. So if we don't do anything now, 10 years from now, we're going to be looking back and say we missed another opportunity.
100%.
Yeah. Rob Morris, Director of Residential Programs for Phoenix Youth Programs. Thank you so much for this.
Thank you, Sheldon. I appreciate it. Have a good day.